Hi, and welcome to today's episode of pianoTV. So I wanted to take you on a tutorial through Tchaikovsky's short little piece called The Sick Doll. And this is a great level 2 piece for not only for children, like from the album in which it's named, Children's Album, but it's also great for adults who want to explore storytelling. In this video, we're going to go really in depth into chords. And we're going to talk about how Tchaikovsky tells this really dramatic and sad story with his use of chords. And we're going to talk about just kind of like the songwriting implications of using those chords along the way. So if you're interested in chord theory, learning more about chords, and if you're interested in songwriting, this might be a good tutorial to follow. Let's get started. This piece can be found in the Grade 2 Royal Conservatory of Music syllabus, which I'll link to in the blog post. And you can also find the sheet music online at imslp.org, and I'll link to the sheet music for that as well. Now, this is a little bit of an easier tutorial compared to some of the Grade 3 stuff we've been doing lately, but I thought this would be like a good opportunity to explore expression and drama through chords, so that's why I chose this one. The Sick Doll is from Tchaikovsky's Children's Album, Opus 39, and was inspired by Robert Schumann's similar collection of pieces for children called Album for the Young. We recently did a Grade 3 tutorial for Tchaikovsky's Morning Prayer, which is a Grade 3 level piece in this same album. So check that out if you like it, if you like this tutorial today and you missed it. This collection has 24 pieces. It was composed in 1878. And if you played all of the short pieces in this album start to finish, it would only take you about 30 minutes. Like Schumann, Tchaikovsky thought that there wasn't really much in the way of good children's music for piano. So because of that, he just decided to write his own collection. Some of the pieces are named after nationalities, like you have Italian song and French song, Russian song somewhere down here. You have ones named after dances like mazurka and waltz. And then you have some with expressive titles like the ones we're doing today, The Sick Doll, or you have The New Doll. I guess there's a lot of doll-themed ones. These pieces vary in difficulty from early intermediate to advanced intermediate. The Sick Doll is probably one of the easiest pieces in this collection, so I think it's a good starting point for kids getting into Tchaikovsky. So let's go to the piano, let's take a listen through, and then we will get into a discussion on chords. So let's start with some basics first. Let's figure out what key this piece is in. And what I mean by that is what scale is the Sick Doll based on. So there's two flats. We have a B flat and an E flat. Now there are two scales that have two flats. One of them is a major scale and one of them is a minor scale. So the major scale that has two flats is B flat, and the minor scale is G minor. So in order to figure out, okay, is this a major key or minor key song? Let's take a look at the opening chord. Now you'll notice the first three notes, we have a G, a B flat, and a D. And you'll notice that's outlining a G minor chord. So that's a pretty strong indicator right there. If the very beginning of the piece has a minor chord, it's probably in a minor key. And I always like to go to the ending and double check just to see if we're seeing the same thing. And in this case, we're seeing a G, a B, a B flat, a G. So we're seeing another G minor chord. So this is a minor key piece. Next, we got our tempo marking, which is lento. Lento just means slow. And since we don't have any specific tempo, since slow is a pretty broad term, you'll notice that if you listen to various recordings, different performers have different speeds within that slow range. So basically just go with your heart desires. So finally, when we're talking basics, let's figure out the form, the song form. I think it's pretty safe to say that this piece is in binary form. Binary is 2-part. Okay, so we usually label it as part A and part B. And what we look for with binary are 2 distinct sections, but they do have some things in common. And the sections are usually marked by double bar lines. So this is a pretty good indicator that we're switching to a different part. And they actually start the same, but they end up kind of diverging a little bit, which is pretty common with binary form. And then there's no real other return to the A section or third form. So it's pretty safe to say we're in binary here. So the main topic of discussion for this piece today is the chords. So before we even get into the chords, I want to get the Roman numeral thing on this page sorted out here. So what I have on the top line are all of the notes of a G minor scale, G, A, B flat, blah, blah, blah. And then below it are the Roman numeral representations for each note of the scale. So you'll notice it just goes in order 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, as per, the notes of the scale. So pretty straightforward so far. The only thing to qualify here, I might as well finish these lines. The only thing to qualify here is the difference between the lowercase Roman numerals and the uppercase Roman numerals. These just determine if it's a major chord or a minor chord. So if we have lowercase, it's minor. If we have uppercase, it's major. And then there's one different here, like the 2 Roman numerals that are lowercase with the asterisk. It should be more of a circle, but I didn't have anything like that on the keyboard. So that would be a diminished chord, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So the tonic chord, number 1 chord would be G minor, the V chord would be a D major chord, and so on. Let's take a look at the chords in the A section first. One thing that you might notice with this piece and other simpler pieces is that they tend to measure in 4-bar phrases. So how I know that is just kind of by observing the chords. You'll notice that we open with a G minor chord, which is our I, and then we start the next section with another G minor chord. That kind of, to me, indicates that we're starting fresh. We're starting again. And the note right before it is a V7, which is like a tension chord. So it's leading us into the next phrase where we see the exact same thing. We start with the I, we end in V7. And then we have another 4 bars. If you kind of just look through, there's a pattern there, and then there's another 4 bars here. So this is very symmetrical, and again, a lot of composers do this, even in more complicated music. One thing that I find interesting in the first half of this piece, like the A section, is that every single 4-bar phrase ends with either a V7, the dominant 7th chord, or just the dominant chord, which in this case is a D chord. And this gives us a feeling of tension because every end of phrase ends up sounding like a question rather than an answer. So Tchaikovsky leaves us with a question at the end of every phrase, almost like the child's asking, "Is my doll gonna be okay?" So that's the end of the phrase, and it leaves us unresolved. I'll show you again with both hands. A little faster. Here where we stop that, it's very unresolved. The first 2 phrases have very simple chord patterns. We're just going back between I, V7, I, V7. I could refer to them as their actual names. I guess I could say the tonic and dominant, the tonic and dominant. Now, if we were to just write a song and do this 2 times in a row, where we just go from the same chords over and over and over, it could be boring. But one thing that Tchaikovsky does is he varies the bottom notes so that the bottom notes are in this constant state of movement. They're moving up and then down and then up and then down. So by playing around with the bass note of each chord, he makes the chords sound a little bit more fresh than they would if, you were just duplicating the same tonic chord at the beginning. In the third phrase, this is kind of fun because Tchaikovsky takes us on this downward journey in the next 4 bars. The bass notes are moving down one by one from G to F sharp to E to D. And one thing is that you'll notice that downward progressions like this are really common in sad sounding music. For obvious reasons, it kind of just like pulls our heart down. So here we start simply enough with our tonic chord, and then we move to our V chord, which is again the stuff that we've been doing for the previous 2 phrases, so that's all well and good. But the very next chord is a half diminished chord. So I would write that like this. So lowercase, it's minor. So lowercase i's, half diminished, there's a circle with like a line through it, and then 7. So when you do this, this is where you basically take like a regular major 7 chord. In this case, we'd do E flat, G, B flat, D. That's a regular major 7th. And then you raise the lowest note. So instead of it being a flat, we turn it into just a regular E, an E natural. So here's what that diminished chord sounds like in the context of the piece. It's divided between the hands, but it still has that really dreadful sound that's so common to all diminished chords. So when we finish that whole phrase, we still end with a question, just like every other phrase. We see a similar sort of pattern in the final phrase of the first section. We start with another dreadful, they sound very dreadful, half diminished chord, the second chord, and then we move through a chord pattern to the 5th, to the 4th, and then we end with our question mark. The B section starts with the exact same phrase of the A section, the same 4 bars, but then it starts to diverge and get a little bit more dramatic in the next phrases. The second phrase returns to that tonic chord, but the right hand ends up leaping to a higher note, which immediately changes the vibe and adds more intensity. Then we carry on through a sad descending right hand until the final chord of the phrase surprisingly brings us to a G major chord. So in the second phrase, we jump really high, and then we suddenly end with a bit of a question in the key of G major this time. It's almost like the child is like, maybe the doll is all better. But that ends up bringing us to our weirdest chord phrase of the whole piece. So you start with a common 4th chord, and then we jump here, which is a really unusual choice. It's essentially an E flat 7 chord, and this startles us, but it sounds still hopeful a little bit. But then our right hand is sinking further and further and further, which is kind of like a despair pattern. You see that a lot in songwriting. In the A section, the child concerned about the sick doll keeps asking questions at the end of each phrase. But at the end of this phrase, the child is like full out despair because we end with a diminished chord. Oh, sorry, not this one. You hear that? It's getting more tense. And then it's almost like grim realization hits. You can hear that in that diminished chord. It's really gnarly. The next phrase here starts with the tonic chord, which again is pretty common in this piece, and it ends with our good old despair chord, the diminished 7th chord. It's like if you're thinking about this as a story, it's like the child has reached this dark realization that her doll might not survive, which is a really heavy storyline for kids. The next phrase is pretty similar, but it's entirely minor chords now. It's like we're going from the tonic to the second chord, I think that's called the supertonic, to the tonic again, and then to the 4th chord, which is also minor. So at this point, it's like there's no hope anymore. And even the end of the phrase is less of a question mark. It's more of like a solemn realization now. So at the end of every phrase in this piece, the child is asking questions, further getting sadder and sadder as the piece goes on. When we get to the final bars of the piece, Tchaikovsky does something that finally changes the sound. He ends with our G minor chord. So the very last phrase of the entire piece, we finally get a resolution. It doesn't sound like a very happy resolution, does it? And if you need more proof that the ending is, you know, not good for the doll, like things are ending pretty dark, the very next piece in Tchaikovsky's set is called The Doll's Funeral. So kind of gives you an idea of where the song's going. That is all for today's tutorial video. I hope you enjoyed these. I like to do them approximately once a month or so, give or take. Some months I don't do them, some months I do a little bit more. Just to kind of keep like the more like technical side of piano training incorporated into these videos. So anyway, thank you so much for watching. Give it a like if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you haven't already. You can visit me on social. I exist on Twitter and Facebook. We also have a Patreon page if you'd like to show your support that way. And yeah, that about sums it up. Catch you in the next video. Really, cat? Really, cat? I'm gonna go throw her toy far away so you can be loud and annoying somewhere